I'm Esther Magyarósi, Climate Finance Manager at the ICLEI World Secretariat, and I'm really very honored to have this very first step webinar on finance tools. As you can see, we call it Finance Tools 1 because we plan to organize a webinar series where we would like to share and introduce tools that help project preparation and reach the level of bankability. Before we get started, I would also like to go over a few items that you know how to participate in today's event. First of all, this webinar will be recorded and the link will be shared with you after the webinar. You are muted, and if you have questions, please use the raise the hand symbol, which is just next to your name. Or you also have the opportunity to submit your questions by typing them in the question pane, which is in the control panel. We want this today's webinar be really interactive, so we dedicated like half an hour, or if needed, even more, we can dedicate for questions and answers. But if you already want to send your questions anytime during the presentation, you can do it using this question pane, and we will collect and address them during the Q&A session. So as I see, most of you are TAP applicants, which makes me particularly happy to see. I wouldn't really spend enough time on explaining the TAP, the Transformative Actions Program itself, but focus on our topic today and leave sufficient time for discussion. Just to set a bit the scene, I wanted to share with you this slide on project development cycle, showing the different phases, starting with enabling environment until the implementation. As you see, the pre-feasibility study, which is the topic of our webinar today, it's still a part of the early stage project preparation, but is a very important part. Although we still see a lot of you are struggle with designing that one, still this is crucial to be done properly because investors, funders, financial partners, project preparation facility providers usually get interested in projects when this is already properly done. So with this, let me introduce you our expert and speaker today, Mohamed Hal, who will then drive you through the steps and do's and don'ts when preparing your pre-feasibility study. Mohamed, the floor is yours.
All right, you can hear me now, right? So, I guess everyone can hear me. I think you should see me as well. Right. Okay, how are you guys? And I want to check if everyone can hear me. So can you type me out if everyone can hear me and can see me? You can see the slides properly.
We can hear you, Mohamed.
Oh, all right, you can hear me?
We can hear you and we can also see you.
Great, that's great. Okay, guys. Firstly, thank you for being here today. Well, we've got like well, overall 32. That's a good number. And I think there are a lot of people from different countries. So I don't know who's in lockdown and who's not, but I think in the upcoming period we're all going to have a lot of webinars. So let me brief it up. This webinar is simply getting you into an introduction about pre-feasibility. We discussed, me and Esther were discussing the level of how advanced the webinar should be. And what we came up with is to start on a very foundation level, because we don't know the levels of people attending. And then we can go to, in the upcoming webinars, in the series that we're going through, we will go into more technical details. We can discuss like the numerical side, the financial side. We can go into very advanced kind of things for those who are interested. But let me tell you something. I'm not a university professor. I'm a management, I'm a finance consultant. I do finance and strategy, so I work in private as well as some in public projects. And I'm a bit pragmatic, so I'm not concerned, and this is my opinion here. I think that sharing knowledge is not the most important thing, and this is not why I'm here. I think what matters more is sharing a solution. So we're doing this webinar because we want to help you make your projects move forward. And to help me do this, you have to share with me your questions. You have to kind of steer. You're the one who's driving here, to steer the content and to ask me a lot of questions. And based on your questions, that's why we're going to put like 30 to 40 minutes Q&A. Based on your questions, I'll decide which points to focus on and which points just cross over. And as well for the upcoming webinars, I will design them, I will tailor them based on your problems and your interests. Okay, so it's not an educational material as much as it is a supposedly like a toolkit for you. Okay, briefly, a pre-feasibility study is something which a lot of people often get wrong. And this webinar is going to be extremely brief. Of course, the topic, well, the whole domain of a feasibility study is a wide domain. And I can't just tell you even a small portion of it in 1 hour. So what we're going to be passing through in these few slides, and as well some brief template, is the foundation. And then in the upcoming webinars, we're going to jump into details. So let me start with what it is. Well, because a lot of people, they just mix it up with a full elaborate feasibility study. See, a PFS, what we call PFS, or pre-feasibility study, a PFS is there exactly to help you avoid an unnecessary feasibility study. Any proper feasibility study is very long. It takes a hard work. If it's a good feasibility study, it gets a hard work, and it requires resources to be done properly. And unfortunately, there are a lot of ideas and a lot of projects on the table, and you can't do a feasibility study for all of them. So a PFS is there to help you first sort of shortlist, and this is the word we're going to use a lot, to shortlist ideas, so that you don't you don't stretch your time and resources thin on a lot of things, and you focus on the things that matter the most. Now we're talking about public projects. Again, this material is focused mainly on public projects, not corporations. So you as a municipality, let's say you've got limited budget, so you need to understand what project, even limited budget for a feasibility study, so you need to know which project you should pursue further. And through a PFS, which is actually a very good point, you start to build a proper understanding of your project, because one of the common mistakes in feasibility studies that people start jumping into studying something which they don't properly understand. They don't understand what is required to do it. They don't understand the technical and the legal, the financial dimensions of it. So a PFS is really a crucial stage you have to go through. Now, why it's crucial? Firstly, you cannot jump into a project without testing the maturity of it. What I mean by maturity of it is, do you really understand what you're stepping into? Do you really understand what is it needed to make it work, and do you have what is needed? So you're going to find me all the webinar going around these 2 points. A PFS, the core part of it is that you need to do something very, very fast, very, very efficient, in a short period of time with very limited resources. You want to shortlist. You want to know if this idea makes sense or not. Okay? And just to answer the question pragmatically, or in a financial term, what does it mean make sense or not? Is to answer this question, you need to say, what does it require to make this idea get to life, to make it work, to make it effective, which we call later on a pillar requirements. And I'm going to get into this, what we call pillar requirements. And do I have, as an organization, the capacity? And what I mean by the capacity are the resources and the capabilities. There's different resources. The financial aspect, capabilities means, do we have the legal, the infrastructure foundation? Because some things, money can buy them. If you don't have the proper legal framework, for example, in your country, if you don't have the proper know-how in your country, in terms of your organization, you might not be able to do a certain project, even if you have some funds. So this is why PFS is important, because it saves you the time of getting into the wrong thing. The idea of getting a thought or an idea and making it a concept is a very important value addition here, because a lot of people mix up as well the concept of the word idea with the word concept. The problem in business, the world of business and the world of economics is very concrete. And I have met in my, like, over a decade working in this field, I've met a lot of people that are very creative. They've got great ideas, but they just don't go anywhere because they just have only ideas. And ideas, for my opinion, are worth nothing if you cannot conceptualize them. And this is a word we're going to go through. I'm going to show you what do I mean by conceptualizing. If you cannot put them in a proper project and business and actionable format. So a PFS will help you formulate this, then you will be able to do a proper feasibility study. Refining solutions. If you have an idea, for example, for waste, if you are working in wastewater treatment, if you have an idea for improving the safety of roads in your city, this is just a solution. This is just an idea. If you cannot refine it and tailor it to fit your financial situation, to fit the lifestyle in the city, for example, and to put it in a project format. And what I mean by project format: phases, stages, funding, and all these things in a very general shape, then you're not able to start even a feasibility study because you don't have a project format. Because you cannot do a feasibility study on an idea. And please mark this point. People start doing feasibility studies on rough ideas. You do a feasibility study once you have a project in a format, even if it's still like raw format, it's okay, but it has to be a concrete format. By the way, if you have any questions, you can shoot me here. Okay, I'm opening now the question section, and I want as well feel, because I'm not getting any feedback, so I want to make sure everyone is following up. And if I'm going too fast or too slow, just let me know. Okay, guys, you're driving here. Just remember, you're driving here. One very important point, and I guess it makes it extremely crucial for the people who are not convinced with the previous few points, is that if you would like to have a sort of funding for your feasibility study, especially if you're working on some sophisticated projects, let's say a big wastewater treatment facility or anything that is like multi-million-dollar project that needs an expensive and complicated feasibility study, you need to show to any organization, whether it is non-governmental or whether it's a bank, you need to show them a proper PFS so that they fund your feasibility study. If you cannot give them a reason to fund your feasibility study, because they've got a lot of people want them to fund their feasibility study, they're going to give the funding to those who have proper understanding of their projects. And you can prove this with a PFS. So let me now go into the second stage, because I guess we all agree, why do we need a feasibility study? I guess we're all aligned that it is crucial now. Now let's discuss a few tips about what you need to do to get it right, and what you need to get off your head completely. You need to shift delete when it comes to feasibility studies or pre-feasibility studies. Okay, just like I'm fixing some conceptions and misconceptions here, then the last stage will be discussing a one-pager approach. Then I'm going to take you through a brief template. All of this stuff will be shared with you, and then we can go through Q&A, and through the Q&A I'll be giving more examples and illustrations by answering your questions. So I prefer to be interactive. So people start looking at an idea, start when, for example, you're making a gathering, a board meeting or something in your organization or municipality. You're looking for the best ideas, but in reality, there's nothing called the best ideas. There's something called the most actionable ideas. You have to start always with asking yourself, what are my constraints? Don't start with, let's say this way, don't start with saying, oh, it's a great idea. Let's start first with saying, what can we do? Well, we can do this and this and this. We got this budget, we got these policies. Because starting with a very cool idea, well, this idea is actually in a sort of a deadlock with resources or with a certain regulation or policy or law in your country. while leaving, and then getting stuck there, while leaving many other ideas that are less attractive, let's say, and less appealing for the public, only because something is more attractive, while there could be an idea which looks more mainstream, smaller, maybe has less impact, but is more aligned with your resources and with your constraints, right? So always start with defining what are my constraints, what are the things that we can't cross, okay? And I suggest you, when you're doing this brainstorming, and we're gonna go through this into the one-pager approach, you know, guys, we're now on a very foundational level, okay? We're not getting the details. So now we are at the stage when you're still in a pre-feasibility stage where you're having some problem, let's say a problem with energy or with waste or with new social housing project, all these challenges you have, and you don't know how you're gonna approach it. So I'm telling you the efficient way is to start first, get a whiteboard, like one I have here, and sit with your team and say, look guys, where are our red lines? So that we don't waste energy clashing with these red lines while there are so many ideas that we can do within the red lines. So I'm not saying here, and again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying here, do not challenge the limitations, do not push boundaries. No, you should push boundaries, but start firstly with making something successful, have some good record, get some things done now, and then on the long term, you can push the boundaries. Aligning with the public policy is extremely important, because a lot of people, again, I keep saying the word a lot of people, but I mean, this is a lot of people that I know, maybe in your case is different. So some people, let's say, are have done a good homework in terms of defining the requirements and the constraints, and they are very well prepared with a good project plan. And then they go to the person in charge, whether it's a mayor, maybe it's a local council, parliament, or a federal government in some cases, and then they propose a very good project, whether in a form of Pfs, project plan, feasibility study, and then they get a straight no, or nothing happens on the long term. And I guess one of the reasons this happened is that the public policy, the general public policy, or let me rephrase it, the decision makers, the policymakers are at the end of the day having political pressures. Most of the people, I guess, joining here are executives. They're people who look at things from a pragmatic perspective, but many of the decision makers, they're just policy executors. So they look at things from a different perspective. They want to run the things which appeal more to the public, things that can maybe get them reelected, or things that can match with the top government or the presidential approach, okay? So I always suggest you here, please do not always start with the things that are easier in terms of matching and alignment with the public policy versus going against. Once you're done with all the ideas that match with the public policy, and I'm sure there are plenty of them, then you can start pushing the lines. There are two different terms that I hope we will not mix up. And I want you to get them straight here. The word inviable, the word viable, people, if they're not familiar with it, it means it's like feasible, but the word viable just means it's possible to be done, okay? And inviable means that it cannot be done. And costly, it means that it's gonna cost a lot of money to get it done. People think that if something is costly, that means it's inviable, or because it requires us to hire a lot of people, it requires a lot of money, that means, well, it's not a good idea, it's not going to work. This is wrong, and I'll have to come into this more into details. Operationally inviable means you want to do something that it is beyond the technological capabilities that are accessible to you, or that are accessible worldwide. Like now, let's say we've got the coronavirus, for example. Having a medication tomorrow morning is operationally inviable. Even if you put all the money you have, it's not possible, because you have to go through a certain process to get it, to get this medication available into billions of people, right? So this is called inviability, when something is just simply not possible from a technical perspective, from the perspective of physics, okay? While operationally costly means that it's possible, you can do it, but it's going to require a lot of work. And I can give a very simple example here. If any one of you has been to Dubai or to any of the cities in the Gulf areas, the big cities, they've got all these big buildings, and actually building such tall buildings was very challenging in a desert format, right? And a lot of people said it's not possible because, well, a lot of details I'm not going to get into now. So it was at some point inviable, but some people got it wrong because it wasn't inviable. It was possible, but it was costly. It just needed way more advanced and different technology of foundations for the building so that it can be built in a desert. Okay, so it's costly, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Okay, why this is important? Because if something is costly, do not rush with canceling the project before you do the financials, because if the financial gains of this project are way beyond the costs, or at least covering of the costs, and maybe there are other social and socioeconomic impacts of this project, then you might go for it. Okay, so please do not rush into judging something on being operationally inviable if it has some possibility to be done in a costly manner. Do not rule out a project if the strategy is not right. What do I mean by that? Now, when you are developing a feasibility study, you develop it based on a certain strategy. You say, okay, guys, we're going to do phase 1 like this, phase 2 like this, and I'm trying to look at the questions here. Okay, no one is, okay, no questions. So you are developing a feasibility study based on a certain strategy. What if the strategy you're putting is not really right? For example, this phase 1 shouldn't be this way, the number of people shouldn't be this way, the location of a certain facility, let's say a biogas facility, shouldn't be in this place. These are all tactics and strategies. If these strategies are not financially feasible, or they're not economically feasible, that doesn't mean that the whole project idea is wrong, and then you should say that you should tell to the public and to everyone that this project is not possible. No, that's a wrong conclusion, because a project is still possible. It's just you're using the wrong route, let's say, and you just need to find a better way of getting this project done. A lot of people might ask then, how do we know? How do I know that my project, that I should forget about the whole project, or at least put it at the bottom of my priorities, or work on the strategy? Maybe the strategy is having a problem of the project. So the answer is, I mean, aside from the theoretical answer, the practical answer would be validate with a consultant. Really, I'm not saying that you, or not a consultant, someone, an outsider. It doesn't have to be a consultant like someone like us. It can be anyone. It can be someone, a colleague who's not working with you on the project. Get someone from an outsider perspective and review the project over and over again. If you see that people agree with you that the problem, that there's no other way except the strategy that you mentioned, and there are no other alternative strategies, then you should leave the project aside for a while. But if you see that there are other possible ways of getting the project done, which could make it more economically feasible, more operationally feasible, more attractive for investors and for policymakers, then you should start twisting your strategy. Before engaging, please make sure that you tested all the ideas and you shortlisted them. And what do I mean by this? I mean that you should not rush into saying, I've got a solution to the traffic problem before you have done proper brainstorming with all people on board. And this is a common mistake done even in startups, that, you know, the first idea that comes to your mind, you say, oh, that's the best idea ever, we should just start working on a feasibility study here. That's wrong. You should not start going into a feasible or to testing if something is going to work or not before having all the alternatives there at the beginning. And then here comes the value of a PFS, so that you can start validating them very fast. Okay, this one works, this one maybe, this one not really, this one might be, and then you rank them, you shortlist them, then you focus on them later on. If you will start with 1 or 2 ideas, so most probably you're missing a lot of other ideas. When you're doing a study or research, we are humans. At the end of the day, we will plug in our opinion in it. So try as much as possible when you're doing a study, in this sense, to stay away of your opinion. Even, of course, you have some opinion, you might have some sentimental approach towards a project, maybe. But what you have to do to be convincing, you have to focus on facts. Focus on saying, this is the facts that we see in the market, these are the benchmarks, these are the figures, and this is what we should do according to these facts. Don't say we believe, we think. I mean, believe and think as much as you want, that's fine, but you have to ground this with facts. That's another mistake a lot of people do. Mixing a PFS with an FS, like a feasibility study is the long report, although I don't prefer very long feasibility studies because no one reads them actually. However, okay, if you want to go into a lot of details, then you do a feasibility study. There's some people, and I'm really surprised seeing this with a lot of even big organizations, people doing a pre-feasibility study of 15 and 20 and 30 pages. This is not a pre-feasibility study anymore, because the concept of pre-feasibility study is to be brief, is to take as little of your time as possible, and is to take as little of the audience's time as possible to read it. Now you're making 15 or 20 page report for a PFS, so this is not a PFS. And what I see now, actually, the people who do feasibility studies and getting into this domain, most of the studies that I look at, actually, they're lying something in between being a PFS and FS. So they're not sufficient feasibility studies, and they're too long pre-feasibility studies. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky here. And what I suggest you do not go into so much details, and focus on answering the question of what is the project is about. I mean, I'll tell you now what should be the ingredients of PFS. I don't want to jump into this point now, but what I just need to tell you, please do not make it so long. Making a long PFS doesn't mean you have done a good job. On the other side, you have made it very, very complicated for people to read, and you wasted a lot of time in it. Do not seek a conclusion like this, and this is exactly what I wanted to say here in the previous point. This conclusion of a project, that you are doing a PFS so that you can conclude that something is going to be a great success and you should allocate all the resources to, this is wrong. A PFS should not answer you this question. So you're going to tell me why I'm doing it. You're doing it so that you shortlist, so that you say, is it really a terrible idea or is it a maybe idea? So the best outcome you would get out of a PFS, that something is possible. So the reason you do it is that you try to filter out all the things that are really terrible, to leave the things that are maybes, and then the maybes you keep shortlisting more till you reach maybe the 2-3 maybe ideas, and then you go into a feasibility study in them. Benchmarking. See, benchmarking is something that some people are lazy to do, and I don't know why, although it saves you the time of reinventing something that already exists. You want to do a sanitation project, please put some time to research what other people have done, look at the cost, because a lot of people ask this question. I guess I got as well this question before the webinar. From where to get the data, from where to get the statistics. If you do some benchmarking, if you check what's in the market, what other projects were done in different municipalities, and I guess ICLAI, as a leading organization, they've got a lot of organizations, a lot of offices, worldwide, and they've got a lot of projects running everywhere. So you can, for example, go to ICLAI or any of the international organization, ask them, guys, do you have access for people who have done this project somewhere? And maybe they can share their practice with us. Maybe they can share some figures with us. And try to, as much as possible, to stay updated with case studies, because they're going to give you very good ideas and they're going to give you very good content, and it would save you a lot of time for a pre-feasibility study. Focus on answering the questions. Again, the academic way, I have full respect for academia. I mean, I've done a master's degree. I spent enough time in university. So, I mean, I don't mean any insult to academia. But the problem that we see always in feasibility studies is that people do a study like they're doing a master thesis or writing a research paper. So they're putting as much information as they can. Anything they find, they just plug it in, and they put so much information, so much researches, so much data and figures that are actually, I wouldn't say they're irrelevant, but I would say they are actually distracting. So don't get into this. When you're putting any information into a PFS, especially a PFS, focus on answering a question. Like what? A question of, is this land suitable for doing the project? Yes or no? Let's say you want to build a biogas facility. Yes or no? Is the local regulation, or for example, are the local regulations in your local government suitable to get international funding or not? Do we have enough equity? What are the regulations with the PPPs, the public-private partnerships? Just plug in questions and answer the questions. Don't put reports about how the history was done, what are the data, what are the geological research over a certain piece of land. This is not all important. You just need to answer a question, and then if someone wants extra details, he can do extra investigation after. Avoid irrelevant and excessive info. This is exactly what I said. And you have to focus more on mainly these three elements, which I mentioned at the first slide. What are the requirements? You know, the word requirements, you're going to keep hearing from me all the time, because a success of any project is simply, the word success is simply meeting requirements. To successfully do a project, that means you just got to identify its requirements and you manage to fit these requirements. So define the requirements, define the impact. And there's something in public projects that, I mean, people have to look at public projects a little bit differently, that you are not a business. So not all the time you have to look at the economic feasibility, because sometimes something is from an economic perspective. I mean, if you're going to look at it from a direct financial perspective, might not generate a lot of money, actually might be on deficit. But it might be a very valuable project from a social or I mean, mainly from a social or environmental perspective, like sustainability projects, okay? So I would say I like to call them, they have indirect financial impact, because when you decrease the carbon dioxide in the air, for example, we've got a very good financial impact on the long term, because the climate problem that's happening now is costing us money worldwide. So impact is very important to focus on, and the match to context. So these three elements are the elements where your whole PFS should focus on while you're thinking about it. What is needed to be done? What impact this project is going to deliver and to whom? And is it matching to the context? Is it matching to the constraints, to the resources that we have, to the policies and regulations? And is it matching to the local residents' needs and to the current context? That's it. Excessive information is not needed. Now let me pause at this point and get questions. There's someone writing here in French. Okay, merci beaucoup.
Yeah, exactly. Questions are coming. So I can read some. Mariani Yanti asked if what are the items that should be included in the PFS. I think
Okay.
it's the template that you will talk about later, and we will share. But
okay,
then
Esther,
also,
maybe I will find. I mean, I can see the questions here. Maybe I just need to find a way I can, because I can see them just in very small fonts, because you reading them all might be all hard for you.
okay, I can read you. So Rafael Edu from City of Cotonou has a question saying, for our city, we have different departments which translate our ideas during our meeting in projects on one page. Pure full studies are done in case we are able to implement with our own funds. But when financial partners are interested, then we follow their tools for feasibility studies. That way our city operates. Any comment?
Okay, so let me get the question right. So what you're saying here, or what she or he was saying here, was that they just have to follow the guidelines of feasibility studies set by the financer or the organization engaged, right? And you're asking me to comment whether this is right or wrong?
Rafael, I will unmute you, right?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, you know, I'm not saying that it's wrong or not. Just let you know the way we operate. We couldn't say it's wrong because depend on each partner. We have to follow the way they assess the project or the way they want complete feasibility studies. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you very well.
Thank you, and thank you also to Ike.
Thank you. Okay, let me, you know, now I can read the questions very well, all right? So, I mean, I'll get you, I'll briefly hope to get your point right. So, Good that you mentioned the idea of tools for feasibility studies, tools and templates. See, guys, I'm a person who've got some allergy towards tools and templates. Why? One of the big problems that make one of the causes why feasibility studies, they take so long and they end up being ineffective in many contexts, because we have to think from this dimension, right? What makes it not work? One of the reasons why it doesn't work is that we follow a structure sometimes which is not really matching the reality, the nature of the project. So, for example, some templates you get to read, some templates I get to see, and I see that they could work very well in Italy, in Switzerland, in Sweden, but they wouldn't work in Nigeria, with all the due respect. They wouldn't work in Egypt, they wouldn't work in India, because some data is not available, the nature is completely different, and so on. I have got the honor to work in many countries, and I can tell you this, and I worked in different industries as well, and I can surely tell you this. There's no way you would take any tool and template and use it as it is. You have to customize it, and you have to tailor it to your needs. So the concept of a Bible in anything in management or economics or business or anything in management, there's no Bible for management, because management is so complicated. It depends on the culture and the nature of the project and the industry you're working in. So the answer is, tools are good to give you ideas, templates are good to give you ideas, but please do not follow them blindly as a Bible. Feel free to customize them to make things easier for you and to make sure that you're covering the other points that the tool is not covering for you, because some risks are there in India or China that do not exist in USA. So the guy who's putting some risk assessment for the US or putting it for Norway doesn't know the risks that do exist in doing business in Ghana, for example, right? So we have to be careful here. Now, there's another question. Should we include all the three aspects of economic, social, environmental aspect, or just economic aspect first? That's from Mariani. Okay, you know, guys, one of the things I would really prefer, people putting questions, I would prefer knowing the country, because it's gonna give a certain aspect here in answering the question. It's gonna make as well the other audience.
From Indonesia.
Indonesia. Okay, great. Great. So so that people as well know what perspective these questions are coming from. That's a very good question. I would say, see, I don't want to mix my opinion with the reality. My opinion, I'll put it aside. Let me tell you the different perspectives that exist. From a perspective of a bank, international bank, or a donor, or not a donor, maybe, I would say a financer, let's say a development bank or commercial bank or private equity that is getting into the project. 90% of the weight of their decision is economic. So that's why I'm telling you this question is tricky. It depends who's seeing it. That's why I'm taking my perspective out. I have to answer it with the perspectives different people might be talking to. So if you're talking to financiers, 90% economic. If you're talking to NGOs like, let's say, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they are one of the best philanthropies existing now. They're going to look so much on the social and environmental aspect and less on the economic aspect, because they really care about this aspect. If your project is a project that needs scaling up, then they're going to look at the economic perspective, because if your project is a one-time shot, like you need to build a school in a village, okay, that's fine. But if you need to make a sanitation system to be existing, you're doing it in a village with the goal of having the sanitation system existing into 500 other villages, then it has to be economically feasible to exist with others. So again, this question is tricky, but let's say this way, please give the economic aspect a higher consideration if you want financing and if you want to scale it, because if you want to scale it, then you need investors with you. Other question coming, let me start. I've got quite a lot of questions here coming up. Okay, I'm happy, guys, that you're asking questions. So I love to pose and answer them. In South African municipalities, we use an integrated development plans. I don't get your question right. That's the question of South Africa. Can we refer to the IDP and the Pfss to state public consultation and buy-in was obtained. Would you, Rolian, would you please tell us what you mean here by this question?
Yeah, I unmuted you, Julian. You can ask your question.
Okay. Yes. As a municipality, we list all our projects in our integrated development plan. So these are the type of projects that we use to apply for funding. And as part of our IDP, we do public consultation. Now, I want just to know, would that be sufficient to motivate public buy-in, or do you still need to do additional processes to show the potential financer that there was public consultation?
I mean, in case you're looking for private financing?
Yeah. Yes.
Look, of course, if you're looking for private financing, it's not enough. You would need to do the whole job. You know, if you're seeking private financing, regardless of what they say in meetings and conferences about their beautiful intentions, but at the end they look to your project like a startup. So this wouldn't be enough. You would need to show do the whole homework of the feasibility study. Sounds good?
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I'm just trying to answer questions short so that we give chance for everyone to participate. Marianne again was asking what items should be included in PFS. Marianne, this question is coming here about the approach, about the elements that you need to put in PFS. Again, this webinar doesn't include everything. So what I'm going to be doing, and again, because I do not believe in the one-size-fits-all concept of putting you some Bible and then you have to follow it. I like giving people ideas and then you pick up from it what fits you more. But I'll share with you some things here. What I'm going to share with you here, you can email me after, tell me, listen, I've got this exact challenge. Tell me how I'm going to use what you're saying in my challenge. Then I'm going to get back to you with answers. Okay, so that's it. Technically, a lot of people are saying yes and all good. Okay, thank you. And well, there was a French question here. So
yeah,
look, I understand.
There was a French question about if you can provide this webinar also in French.
I speak some French, but my French, see, I can read French fine, but my French is not great, especially business French. I mean, I can have a friendly conversation out with in French, but yeah, but then I'll need to work on that.
We know that language is in general an issue, so what we will try to have a look at ICLAI, that at least we can translate the template into different languages, but
sure.
To provide a webinar in French, Spanish, Portuguese, unfortunately at the moment it's not really feasible, but we can have a look at it if we can translate the presentation and the template at least.
Sure. I mean, we can cooperate as well with the regional offices. If anyone would like, if people will be volunteering to help in this, and then we can do something. Okay, now let's get in the one-pager approach. This is the last kind of thing. I need to take these things off the screen. Okay, so that I can see it properly. Okay, this is like, I would call it just an approach. It's not the only approach. It's not the perfect. I would say for me, it's perfect. I mean, for me, this is what I use. This is how I structure my way of getting into PFS or even feasibility study. But yeah, feel free to customize from it. Then we're gonna go and look on some templates that could help you with. And I guess what we're gonna do after I finish this slide, I'm gonna get a case study. I'm gonna make an example of a project, and then together we can do some practical application of this. Now, let me first show you this funnel, how it looks like, if you guys are familiar with this diagram. The whole concept here in this funnel, if you can see my mouse moving, let me know if it's not. I mean, I'll say it this way because sometimes I don't look at questions. Esther, if I would ask a question about testing something, if it's not working, please just interrupt me, open the mic and tell me if it's not working, okay? So that if I'm not looking at the chat box. So I hope you can see my mouse here. And what I'm trying to show here is that the goal, again, let's get back to the goal of a PFS. The PFS is there to help you narrow down and to shortlist. So what I mean by shortlist is that you want to put more, you want to allocate your time to as little number of ideas as possible. You don't want to spread your resources and time thin on so many ideas, because feasibility studies, public projects are big. So if you're going to spend in every one of these projects like 100, 150 man days, you're not going to deliver anything even in 10 years. So what you have to do is that first you have to start with a stage where there are so many ideas here. So the width of the diagram is the number of ideas. The length is the time you consume in every stage. So you've got here 5 phases. Oh, this is how I see it. The first phase is the phase of ideation. And this is where I came in the do's and don'ts. I told you, do not skip ideation. Do not skip the brainstorming stage. Do not think that the first idea that crosses your mind is the best idea. It's not. So it would be the best after checking a lot of other ideas and then mixing them up all together, okay? So ideation should take not much time you're spending in it. You should it should be a few sessions, and you should bring as many people as possible, let people speak up, and try to consider as many ideas as possible. Then after that comes constraint analysis. And this is very interesting, right? A lot of people tell me why you're starting with constraint analysis. Constraint analysis is just a bulky word, but in brief, it means what are the limitations? What are the red lines that we cannot cross? The money, the laws, the technical constraints. Let's say we've got a certain piece of land or plot of land for this project. We cannot change this. Define the things you can change and the things you cannot change. If you do not define this early in the project, believe me, down in the feasibility study, things go wrong in a terrible way. Okay, so please, this stage is extremely important. Define your constraints really in advance. And then do shortlisting. Shortlisting means you got a lot of ideas and then now you have your constraints. So you start shipping out and rolling out all the ideas that do not fit the constraints so that you can have a shorter list that is more feasible into your local context. Then after that, you go into conceptualization. The word sounds a little bit, complex, but it's simple. You just develop a concept out of the idea, because till now you had all ideas. You just have maybe a couple of paragraphs about every idea or every project, but you don't really have a concrete project plan or concept. This is the time where you start developing a project profile. And I'll show you what a project profile should look like. This is in the template. And then after that, you do what I call a brief, I like to call it speed feasibility check, but people don't get it right. So, okay, a brief feasibility check. And this is something that I guess we should go through in the next webinar, okay? But we have to do voting on this. You guys are decision makers here. So a brief feasibility check is that after you have very few ideas, see, I mean, if you look here, you have here a lot of ideas. Now you go to the last stage, the 5th stage, you have almost maybe half or supposedly 1/3 of what you started with here. Then you start doing a very quick feasibility check on every one of these ideas. Then at the very end, what comes out of here is maybe 1, 2, or 3 ideas, maybe around 3 ideas, let's say, where you have to go into feasibility study on them. So now, instead of doing a feasibility study on 25 ideas, which is not possible by any means, you selected the best ideas. Of course, a lot of people do what? They have 25 ideas, then they sit in the meeting room, and then the big guys, the top managers, they just select 2, 3 ideas from here, and instead of going through this whole shortlisting process, they say, okay guys, this idea and this idea and this idea, they sound good, let's go and do a feasibility study of them, without going and checking these elements on the way. And without doing these elements on the way, they end up doing a feasibility study of something that they don't really understand. They don't have a concept of, they never checked if these things meet the minimum constraints that they have. So they end up wasting time. Okay. Now, what do we mean by ideation here is coming with as many ideas as possible. To come with as many ideas as possible, you have to firstly understand your problem. You have to understand what exactly problem I'm trying to solve. Okay, guys. What I'm going to be explaining here in the approach is it's going to sound a little bit vague or high level. And excuse me for this, because I need to give you a very pilot view on how the process looks like, right? But then I would leave it for you out of all the points that I'm going to go through. If you have something that is really interesting for you, you can't tell me, please tell us what do you mean, how to scope a problem. then I'm going to take you to the OneNote. I'm going to use the digital pen and draw to you how to use scoping or analysis. Okay, this is to save time and to make it more to your needs. So after you understand your problem, you understand exactly the dimensions of the, let's say, sanitation problem that you have, the energy problem that you have, the waste problem that you have. You start to research best practices. Yes, before you do a brainstorming, guys, you have to research the best practices. You have to look at what others have done, especially in similar context. What goes on, what happens often is that people who are often innovative, they just jump into making ideas without looking what is already being done and existing. And this is like the creative trap. So please, when you're benchmarking, look at countries and places that are similar to your own local, like to your own municipality or local government, to your own context, economic, social context, because many of the practices that you're going to read about in conferences and in white papers, they might not fit you. Okay, it's going to be a little bit tricky. So research the best practices that fit you, and then you can go through a brainstorming. Okay, not after. What do I mean by free brainstorming? I don't mean it's free of charge. Well, it should be, of course, free of charge, but free brainstorming in this sense means that you have to let all the ideas float. Do not block an idea. And this is one of the rules of brainstorming. And let everyone participate. And I suggest you here a small note. Let even the people who are low level, I don't mean by low level, low hierarchy level, okay? Low hierarchy level employees who are really working on the ground, maybe some admins who are meeting people every day, who are working in remote villages. Those people will come up with the best ideas, by the way. And they will give you the best perspective. Maybe they don't have the capacity to formulate the best solutions, but they're going to give you very good insights. So make sure your brainstorming is inclusive, and then you have to go through a model or an approach. I like to call it the F3. F3 means you have to filtrate. Stands for 3 Fs. You have to filtrate. When you get ideas, you have to look for the best ideas out of them. I mean, there are a lot of ideas after you finish the brainstorming completely. So during the brainstorming, you don't do any criticism. After you finish it, you have to get out the ideas that really are completely, out of context. Then you're gonna, out of, let's say, 70, 80 ideas, you do some fusion. You start connecting ideas and mixing them together. Okay, this and this, we can put it in one. And then you do some filling gaps, which means that you start saying, okay, how to do this, because we don't know from where to get the permit. This organization can give us a permit, so you write it down. So you start to look, what are the missing elements in every idea so that the idea at least looks concrete, okay? Now, constrain analysis. After you've got all the ideas, maybe proper ideas, filtered, fused, connected, and in a good format. So now you've got but you've still got a long list of ideas. You need to start identifying the crucial needs and priorities. What do I mean by that? I mean that you need to look at what the policymakers, what we just said at the beginning, what matters more, not from your perspective. You know your perspective already. I mean, it's already in there. You have to look from other people's perspective. And what I mean by other people, preferably not your colleagues, not your wife or husband, but your decision makers and the financiers. Okay, the people who are really, they've got a big say in this project. Define resource limitations. This part is tricky a bit. Why? Because theoretically speaking, resource limitations almost do not exist, because you can access as much resources as possible, as much as you need, if you have a feasible project. I mean, look at the financial markets, there are trillions of dollars, which we're losing a lot of now because of the coronavirus, but still there's money. And you can access a lot of banking institutions, you can access a lot of private equities if you've got a good idea, and as well federal funds. So what do I mean here by resource limitations is to start firstly looking at the local resource limitations, because most of you guys, you represent local governments or national organizations that do have some budgets for resources from taxpayers, public funds. So what do I mean first is the public funds, they have limitations. So please start with defining them very, very early, of saying, okay, if we're going to do a sustainability project or a low emission kind of project, how much money we can get. Yes, guys, you have to be very pragmatic. You have to be very honest with yourself from the beginning, and you have to be critical towards your idea. So at some point, you got to be creative, and in the following 10 minutes, you have to be critical to your creativity. So you come and say, okay, this is the amount of money that we have. This is the amount of money you can get from the federal government. Okay, and you write this down. Then you can start looking at how much money we can raise internationally. That's another question. So I suggest you leaving this a little bit aside. You would know it later on. But start with defining the resources that you have now. What are the limitations with? Capability and infrastructure limitations. As I said, there are some things that money cannot buy, right? If you don't have a proper engineering department, if you have problem with licensing, if you have problem with some, let's say, energy infrastructure, okay? For example, you want to do a solar panel project where you want to make a solar energy facility, and to be able, let's say, to distribute the energy over, let's say, 10, 15 villages, you need energy distribution system, right? You need the grid, and there's no grid in place, right? So there's an infrastructure limitation because you're working so much on making the facility, but you don't know how on earth I'm gonna get this energy distributed and how on earth I'm gonna store the excessive energy, right? So that's becomes an infrastructure limitation, and the answer for it always can be, okay, can we include the infrastructure solution in the project or not? Okay, that comes later on the feasibility study. However, please define the limitations in advance so that when you think sequentially in the way I'm putting now, like, you know, guys, I'm putting to you this visual. I put some time in it to get to you the way we think as consultants or as experts in this domain. This is what we do. This is how we think, right? We think in a very sequential way. And by thinking sequentially, you are very efficient and very effective, because if there's something, if there's a gap here, if there's something, if you cannot, let's say, define the needs and priorities or the resources, there's no need to go to conceptualization or pre-feasibility check, because you're already got a big gap. So if you can't answer this question, don't bother asking other questions. Potential political and legal, well, I'm writing here bottlenecks, but I can call them annoying things happening all the time. This is very annoying, and I know it happens, and this is, I would say, one of the main risks that you guys face all the time in your work, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's that you've got all the time mismatch with the political will and mismatch with some legal aspects that are actually working against the community. So please define them so that you can tackle them. Shortlisting. Shortlisting means you have to make this list shorter, okay? Because you did ideation, now you define the constraints, how to shorten this. You define the pillar requirements. Pillar requirements are the requirements pillar, which means if you took them off the project, it doesn't work, okay? So the things that you can't run the project without them. Specify the requirements that cross the constraints. So now I define the pillar requirements, okay? The things that are very crucial. If these crucial things, let's say we need a 10-acre land, that's a pillar requirement, 10-acre land. If the local council is not going to give me the 10-acre land, over, period, shortlist the project. Shortlist means take it off, okay? You cancel it because it is beyond the constraints. This is how you should think. Don't waste any more time in this project. Now focus on the other ideas now. You have to start doing some sort of prioritization of ideas, which means that even after you find that so many ideas are feasible, or they look, okay, not feasible, matching the constraints or matching your capacity, please rank them, okay? Rank them. This is the most effective, this is the most, let's say, the easiest or the most fitting to the constraints, and this is the one that is really on a confrontation with the constraints, with the budget that's put to us from the federal government, with some limitations, with some regulations. Conceptualization, that's the next stage. You have to start making a business model, right? And a lot of people as well say, why do we need a business model? I mean, it can be a non-profit project. It's a project for social service funded by the federal government as well as some NGOs. The answer is a business model doesn't mean that you have to make money, a lot of profits out of it. Well, of course, in most cases now you need to make some money because that's a requirement nowadays. But a business model means how you're going to make this project run in a coherent way. Okay, so how does it work? Who are the suppliers? Who are the service providers? Who's going to buy it? How he's going to buy it? You're answering a sort of operational questions to make sure that the strategy is coherent. Answering crucial questions about the model. This is a very important point, which I just said, these kind of crucial questions that I just mentioned. Developing a one-page project profile. I'm going to show you this now. I have a very brief Excel template. Well, not the most perfect, because I don't know what is your project context, but I think it could be useful. But then after you've got this one page, and I prefer it to be one page or maximum 2 pages, because when you're going to show it to a lot of people who are interested, they don't want to read 10 pages to know about your idea. They need something very brief, and as well you need it. It's just like an ID, like, you know, like your ID card, you need an ID for the project, okay? So now, if you're looking at the mouse here, how I'm showing it up, you go from an idea to a concept. So you make a lot of ideas, you define what are the constraints based on which you're gonna cut out the ideas that don't fit, you cut them out, then the ideas that really stay, you developed proper concepts or proper business project formats out of them. The last thing would be is to define the requirements, the operational requirements for execution, and look at the financial aspect. What do I mean by the operational requirements? You're going to tell me what's the difference between the requirements we define at the beginning. Here you start getting into more details. You start saying, okay, what machinery do we need? What raw materials? What pipes do we need? Are these pipes produced locally? If they're produced in other countries, okay, do they fit the geology or the nature of the land we have? These kind of questions, okay? So you start looking at the deal breakers. And I want you to write down this word, like the operational deal breakers, the things that have happened. So you're going to be actually, when you're doing the pre-feasibility check, you're looking at it from a risk perspective. What is going to make this project go wrong? Okay. After checking that the project doesn't have operational challenges that you cannot tackle or that you don't have answers for, only then you can go for the financial side. So you're going to tell me if I have some operational challenge, let's say how to, you know, guys, I'm not an engineer, but an example of how to, for example, develop a facility to be earthquake resilient in a place that has a lot of earthquakes. If you don't have this answer, for example, and you think it's an operational risk, you should not proceed with the financial work on this idea. Yes, work on other ideas, because you already have like 5, 7, 8 ideas. So if you have an idea which has got an operational challenge that you don't have an answer for, doing any financial work on it is going to be a waste of time, and it's going to be wrong, because the financial work only comes at this point when you have a complete understanding of your project and its operational dimensions. Okay, and of course the financial modeling here is very, very simple. Okay, please guys, don't go into depth. Okay, it's a PFS. You have to just cover the cash flow, you have to cover the profit and loss, and I would say the upfront investment, how much money is needed to kick off the project. And only if the project looks economically okay and operationally viable, then you can go into an elaborate feasibility study, and then your process is done. Okay, now before I get to the template, I think I need to catch up some questions.
Also, before doing that, Mohammed, because yeah. I'm a bit concerned regarding the time, which was more my mistake due to the technical difficulties at the beginning. So I still see that attendees are online, so we didn't lose any of them, which shows me that yeah, there is a great interest. So not to go too beyond to the scheduled time. I suggest that we can continue like 10-15 minutes more, and
yeah, I'm done actually.
Encourage you that if you have questions after the webinar to send us, and we will address them.
Okay, I mean, Esther, see, the template is going to be something really brief now, and I prefer actually if people have questions, they can shoot them now. The template is just a guiding thing to see what you have, but then I would prefer, before I proceed, is to take a couple of questions and then to take them into the template if people can.
Can you read the question box, Mohammed, or shall I read the questions?
I see. Well, I see here for the questions. I don't see any. Are there any new questions coming? Because the last question.
There are from Justin Audren. How much time do you suggest drafting a PFS should take? And for you, what would be the main difference with feasibility study? She's from France, but also operating internationally. This question concerns mainly public stakeholders, especially at municipal levels.
Okay, see, you can read things I don't have. See, ICLAI people, they've got some special talents. So I need to, right, because the last kind of question, okay, so maybe you need to help me here because I'm opening the question list. I'm not seeing all the questions. All right, let me answer this question. Well, firstly, how long should it take, and what is the difference from the full feasibility study? The question of the time is tricky, but I would give you, if you're going to count in terms of hours that you're going to put into it, because you can do it over 1 year if you're just spending 5 minutes every month in it. But if I'm going to put in terms of duration, maybe don't put in it more than 10 man days. All right, 7 to 10 man days. And yes, it should be that short. The issue is, I mean, there's something I want to say here, and good that you raised this point. And this answers the second question of what's the difference from a full feasibility study. A feasibility study is a study. This one, we call it a study, but in reality, this name is wrong. It's a process, not a study. And that's why I prefer to show you it in a format of this funnel, because this is what a PFS is about. It's about getting ideas, filtrating them till you reach something that is worth putting the money and time to study it in an elaborate way. So the answer is, it's a process. How long the process should take, it depends on the number of ideas, but it should take I mean, per idea, let's say it shouldn't take more than 10 to 15 man days overall, because you're going to have a lot of ideas in there. So you shouldn't put, if you're having 5 ideas, so you shouldn't put more than 50 to 60 man days in them. And the difference is, as I said, this is something that should be brief and short. Again, please guys, there's a misleading thing going on there. If you're Google on PFS a lot, you're going to find a lot of people making 18-page reports calling them a pre-feasibility study. And with all my due respect to them, but this is not really correct, because this is exactly what a feasibility study is for. A PFS should be something really brief and short. Okay, so I can take another question.
So there was also a question from Lauren Keren, South Africa. So many municipal projects will never generate a profit, e.g. river rehabilitation. It can scale, but cannot generate a financial return on investment. To attract finance, do we need to quantify social return on investment in PFS? And will that be more attractive? Will that be a more attractive proposition?
I like so much this point, and the answer is that's what I do. I come from mainly a business perspective, so many of my clients are private equities, are multi-million, and some of them are multi-billion private equities. So at the end of the day, everything they have to put a $sign beside. And what you're saying here is the best solution you can ever do to get a quick buy-in. Buy-in means approvals from people. I mean, you're South African, you know the term, but I'm just saying for other people. So the word buy-in, guys, it's really important to keep in mind that you need everyone to support the idea. And monetizing, and the word monetizing is good in this context, monetizing the social impact. It is tricky, it is not easy, but it has its own ways. And if enough people are interested in this thing, I can show you in a different webinar examples how to monetize the social and the environmental impact. And it is extremely valuable. I mean, we have done, I have done similar exercises, even one of the ICLAI projects in Mongolia about the same thing. So if you do not monetize the social impact, you've got a very narrow chance of getting funding when there is a budget deficit. And it happens in many countries. I mean, and all countries now are going with deficits. So considering what is happening now worldwide, I would suggest you please increase the quantitative value beside the social and environmental aspects. Okay, when you say, for example, let's say, let me give an example, okay? About climate change, the carbon dioxide, okay. Well, this is a little bit tricky, but this is what, you know, because this is a domain of ICLAI. You can simply say, you know, we lose this amount of crops every, you can write in your report with this value of the loss of crops worth, like, let's say, $200 million every year. Now, if we contributed in making climate change less by this percentage, so let's say if we're contributing by 2%, 3%, so you can multiply this 2-3% by the damage that is coming because of lost crops. Another thing is the health aspect. You can say, okay, when we decrease the carbon dioxide, nitrogen dioxide in the air, we reduce the number of cases going to the hospital, which then we can decrease the amount of medical expenses that the government has to pay to take care of those guys. And these cases are increasing. Okay, so you can keep playing in this part. I would say no one can do it perfect, of course, but it's a very good approach to get approved in times when there's budget deficits.
Okay, questions are still coming. I'm so happy to see that, to be honest.
That's great.
We will have to stop at a certain point, but it's so great to see this interest. It was definitely a good topic we picked, Mohammed, for this webinar. So the question coming from Rafael Dubanin, actually it's for both of us, and we can think about it together. In case we have to hire a consultant, I think your details are very, very helpful to write our terms of reference. I would like to ask ICLAI if we will have opportunity to have webinar on the preparation of terms of reference for climate projects. We can think about it. If there is interest, we are really happy to collect ideas. And then, of course, yeah, we can brainstorm together what we can do. But if there is interest, we for sure will find a solution for that.
Sure.
Then also very similar to this from Mariani Yanti. Please show us next time how to monetize the social impact, because many of public projects is more giving value of social rather than economic per se. It can be then indeed another topic. We can organize a webinar, or we organize one webinar addressing different questions, but we will for sure brainstorm about it. Then
we will note it down. Yeah, exactly. We can do this.
Yeah, we save all these questions, and as I said, also after the webinar, feel free to send us the questions so we can collect them. And then there is one question I'm not sure I understand from Marcel Iradukunda. Is French webinar operationally inviable or operationally costly? To illustrate previous notes. I'm not sure. Do you? If you understand the question, then please answer, Mohammed.
Can you repeat the question again? Because I get questions, but I get them a little bit.
I also unmute you, Marcel. But the question is
in French.
In French
webinar. Okay, I got it. I got the question actually.
Okay, great.
Okay, I mean the question, because I was seeing, so the person is following up, and thank you, Marcel. Okay, the French webinar. Well, for me, for now, it's inviolable because I'll need to improve my French dramatically. So I think it is possible. I think what can be done in this sense, whether ICLAI can get maybe another specialist who speaks French, just like me, but who can speak French. But what can happen, maybe I can answer your emails in French. If you've got questions, you can send them to me. I can answer them, and equally can help with translating this content in French.
Yes, that for sure we can do. I absolutely understand. As I said, we received also before the webinar several questions coming if there will be this webinar also in French and Portuguese. I wish, I really do wish, but yeah, we can offer answering your questions in writing in French, Spanish, Portuguese, the languages we can collect and speak. But yeah, no webinar for the time being.
Okay, so there are other questions because I don't see more than that.
No, I also don't see more questions.
Spanish.
Yeah, from Daniela. Yeah, in Spanish too, please. Yeah, indeed. French, Spanish, and Portuguese are the three languages we consider. Yeah, we have to check our capacity, what we can do, but we know it's needed and that it would be useful. So we will certainly.
But there's one thing I want to say here, guys. You know, if you're aiming for international funding, you gotta use English, and then you will have to present your content to international, like European Development Bank and all these banks. They need stuff in English. So. Yes, this can be done, but as well, the staff has to keep in mind that English will be needed for international financing.
It is one of the big barriers always identified, the language barrier. Yeah, we will somehow think about how to come over that one, but yeah. Okay, I don't see more questions coming, and we are already quite late.
Let me, Esther, I'll go through the template extremely fast. I mean, there's just a couple of sheets, so I'll just tell people what's in it very, very fast.
Okay, let's then take 5 more minutes, but if you already have to leave, the template will be shared with you. So. And as well as Mohammed's slides, and as said, please send us your questions even later.
Guys, Esther, you can tell me now, you can see the Excel file, right? I'm opening.
We can see that, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, let me go 5 minutes. I'm glad that there's still 25 people hanging on. Well, you know, guys, often these topics are boring. So I think the reason why 25 people are still hanging on a webinar for that long is that there's a lockdown. There's not much throughout. So I'm glad, I'm grateful, and I hope it will be useful for you. Okay, a couple of sheets, okay? Let me remind you, this is not a Bible. Pick up from it what you want. I think it's unprotected, and yes, it's unprotected, so just delete and add. It's just ideas, and I can help you with making the proper checklist. I like the word checklist in a template. So if you share with me your specific project requirements. So how to remember what we said, you need to develop a concept out of the vague, fluffy idea, right? So I like to give an example. You're turning a cloud into a square, because people in the finance world and the policy world, they speak in terms of squares and triangles, and ideas are always in a cloud shape. So first you have to start describing what you're talking about. Okay, there's some things that are easy. Okay, the location, the description, okay, but then comes the necessity. That's a tricky point. Why do we need it? And then you'll have to challenge a little bit yourself, writing why exactly this is very important. The desired impact. And what I'm saying here is not the full impact, the desired impact. Like, what exactly do you need to deliver to the environment, to the social, to people's life, employment, and so on, and economically, the 3 dimensions here. And please, when you talk about desired impact, my advice here when you're developing a concept, please don't write so much text, because I see this is all in tap application. Just write KPIs, write figures, saying we want to take this amount of tons carbon dioxide tonnage out of the atmosphere. Okay, this is more convincing because you're developing this concept, this is a project profile, by the way. That's what we talked about. You're developing it to be able to share it to others, to kind of get a buy-in for your project or get some financing for your feasibility study. Scalability. Scalability is a very important point. Whenever you mention any project, especially a public project, you have to tell us, is this just a phase of something, and this project can be scaled like nationwide, can be, or it can be scaled in the same area. Like you've done a certain biogas facility, can you make it bigger? Can you increase the capacity or not? If it's scalable, you have to say, and it should be scalable, most projects, you have to say how far it's scalable and how big is the first phase that you're working on. Okay, that's an important point. The outcome, okay, that's an important part that you have to say. If you have some visual illustrations of how the building should look like, of how the facility should look like, very important, because many of the people viewing your application are not experts in the project just like you. You know it more. People like me, for example. So you have to put some visual illustrations, maybe from other similar projects, and you have to start answering questions like the sources of revenue. What are the revenue making elements? Are they the government is going to be paying something? Are there going to be some tax payments directed to you? And by the way, this is an element of how to develop a financial mechanism or a business model out of a project. This needs a totally separate webinar. This is going to be something out of the feasibility study context, and I'm going to take a note of this because that's a very important tool. How to make money out of your project, how to be creative in generating financial streams out of your project, okay? So, but so far you have to start answering what source of revenues do you have in mind and the deliverables. And what do I mean by deliverables? That you're writing the elements of your project. You're saying, okay, social housing, we're going to do this number of buildings. The buildings are going to be like this. We're going to do a club. We're going to do a hospital, etc. So these are deliverables, and you have to break them down every deliverable at a point. Stakeholders. This is extremely important at this stage to define who are the people who are on board with you. And I know this list sounds a little bit long, but I wanted to make it inclusive. So who's the project owner is very important. Who's the key decision maker in the project? Who's a contractor? Okay, and then who's a facilitator? Facilitator means who's like the agency that is helping to get license and so on. If you've got consultants on board, if you've got some regulators like, let's say, some association or some national organization that should give license and permits, you should write them all down. If you have operators, if you have some organization, let's say water or sanitation facility in the local government that would be running the facility that you'll develop, if it's different, if it's the same like the owner, you write the same company, you write the same organization. But if it's different, you have to write who's that. And again, it's not certain. It might change down the road, of course, but you write who could be there. The financiers, again, the potential financiers, the beneficiaries, who are the people who will benefit from this project. And they're all the time are residents where people are living. Don't write the beneficiaries the government, and don't write the beneficiaries the local government. You're not a beneficiary. You're always one of these 6 or 7 or 8 elements, but you're never a beneficiary, okay? So you have to say, and when writing about the beneficiary, please specify a little bit with the demographics. Don't say, well, the residents, unless really all the residents are going to benefit from. If it's something for kids, for the seniors, for the people in a certain neighborhood, tell how many people are living in this neighborhood, because it's really important to define if this facility that you're developing or the project that you're developing will benefit the 1 million residents in the whole city or only 100,000 residents in a certain neighborhood. Okay, and please be honest about it. The last couple of things, time frame. Okay, very simple point. Please do not talk about feasibility study or any project if you don't have an understanding of how long a project could take and on how many phases approximately. Is it could be done in 3 phases or it needs 10 phases? And a time frame, projected time frame. What I mean by well, maybe I'm using the 2 different words, but I mean by projected time frame is the time frame that you're putting to start the feasibility study and to start the project. Okay, which is more with the dates. Now coming to the brief feasibility check, that's a very simple slide as you see here. It's just a checklist or a template that could help you answer the few questions that I need you to answer fast. So remember when we said about the operation requirements that you have to tackle before you get to the financial elements or before you get a feasibility study, you just have to write down here the crucial okay, here. You have to write down the crucial elements that you need. You have to write down, do you have the resources and capabilities for them to tackle these elements? Okay, and does it comply with the local policies? Correct me if I'm mistaken, the key main constraints you always have are the resources, the financial side, the capability side, which is mainly infrastructure, sometimes natural, soil, nature capabilities, or legal and local policies and regulations. So when you write any requirement here, maybe this requirement is, you see it's possible, but it doesn't match with any of these two elements. So please write this down. It's a very simple way to just make a quick check on the viability of a project in a very efficient and simple way. Now, the technical risks and constraints, this is a very important point. You have to write what could go wrong. Write all the things that could go wrong. And again, benchmarking here and looking at similar practices could be useful for you. What is the chance that could happen? 1% happens every now and then, and the ability to mitigate. Can you handle this issue or not? If you cannot handle this constraint, if you don't have a risk containment measure, then you are in a bad situation. Just like the entire world is a bad situation and because of Corona, because we don't have a mitigation mechanism in place, right? Last thing, after you have done the quick operational check, and if you have these parts, again, this part answered, and these parts answered, then you can go and say, okay, now I know that the project overall sounds, not 100% sure, but sounds operationally solid. I have answers for questions. Then you can start adding the capital expenditures, which are the main investments that you need upfront. How much operational cost do I need to keep the project running? Like how many people need to be hired, let's say, to run the facility on a monthly basis, raw materials, inputs, all the stuff that you need to pay to operate it. And then the revenue streams that you identified at the first page, you need to write them down and approximately make a projection of how much money you can generate out of them. Of course, I mean, you need to do a side calculation out of the sheet. So just giving you the overall outline for it. And the last thing is how much money you can make it from whom. So you can say out of the federal government, let's say, I can make 65%. Out of loans, I can make 20%, stuff like this, you know. And the last part is to look at the profitability, and this is by just dividing the things that you have up for. I mean, I can do it in a formula if you want. The return on investment, the profitability, how much money this project can make annually, monthly, over 10 years as you like. It's just a Pfs, so you write what you see is there. The approximate return on investment, does this project have a positive or negative return on investment? And the last thing, how much money do you lack, the financing deficit? And you would be able to answer this question through looking at your financing scheme. If the amount of money that you have does not close the 100% of the capital expenditures that you identified here, here, okay, then you've got a deficit, okay? I'm done, I finished. A pre-feasibility study is something simple. It shouldn't take so much time. If it takes so much time, if it takes too much time, then you most probably are doing something wrong. So please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. This is briefly the template that I suggest you to use for now. And I'm now checking the question box. I don't know if anyone, Esther can tell me if anyone put more questions. Because
no more questions.
Okay.
And this time I think it's really good not to have more questions because we have to stop. But I'm really super happy to see this great interest. And as already mentioned several times, we will share the recorded webinar, we will share the slides, we will share the template, and we are there for you even after the webinar. If you have any questions, you can address your questions directly to Mohamed. As you can see his email address here, you can use the tab email account to ask your questions. So there are several ways to reach out, and we will try to answer your questions in all languages possible. So with that, I really would like to thank everyone for attending this webinar, and I also would like to thank Mohamed, our presenter, to be here with us today, and that we could have this webinar, hopefully not the last one, but many more together. And yeah, so thanks again for joining us today, and I wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.